Hello,
Is this,
everybody. Yes,
hey, is this that MR? I saw you create an MR a little bit ago. Is this related to that?
yes, it's Darimar.
Okay.
So we are gonna do a quick demo of the Web IDE test HTTP server, serving all the all the origins, handling all the origins that the Web IDE needs to work in cross origin mode. So I'm going to share my screen here, and let me show you here. Um, so first, let me start with the changes that I did to the example app, or perhaps like we can first like actually play with the server, and then we can talk about the changes. So the first thing that you will notice is that I'm using this URL to access the example app, and it's HTTPS. Um, so it is using this domain. It is a wildcard domain, and it's resolved by the nip.io, the wildcard DNS resolver. This is a very handy tool that will just map any any subdomain that start like with the IP of with an IP. It will convert it into the actual IP. So if I say 127.001.nip.io, it will basically like resolve that domain to my local IP.
Hmm.
And you can continue adding other subdomains to it. So the web ID needs at least three domains, right? One domain for uh, the application embedding the Web IDE. That would be the Rails instance. The domain for the workbench, the VS Code workbench, and then the subdomains for the extension host. Um, for this, the example server doesn't need any change because it's already listening to the 127.001 IP. So I'm just like basically opening the that URL, and nip.io will take care of it. So I go open the Web IDE, and if I open developer tools, move it here, you will see that everything is being served from the example server. So the extension host is served by a local server, and the workbench as well. That is, it could be workbench
Woohoo.
dot blah 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 blah. So yeah,
Nice. Cool. So Workbench is okay. So there's three servers. There's the example app server.
let's call it origins.
Okay, three
There is
origins.
one server serving like
Got it, got it, got it.
three or more origins.
So there's the example app origin.
Mhm.
There's the Web ID workbench origin. Then there's the Web ID extension host origin.
Yeah,
Got it. So when we are talking about the Web ID as a package that's consumed by the Rails app or the example app, it really needs just those two origins, the Web ID workbench origin and the Web ID extension host origin.
exactly.
Got
Just
it.
like
That
for
makes
the example app, we need to have a special treatment, let's say.
was there anything you need to do to get NipIO working for you?
No,
Okay.
it works out of the box. But I had to do a few things to make the example server work with TLS to have a secure connection.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to talk about. I created this little script. Um, First, like I'm using to create a TLS certificate that is accepted by the web browser. The certificate should have a CA authority, right? A root authority. That's basically like a certificate that is stored in the operating system. So in the GDK, we are using this tool that can create root certificates that is called MKCert. So this is the same tool that I'm using for the Web IDE. And the idea is that you have to create a certificate that will map to the domain, like to the NIPIO domain. So
Mm,
if I delete these certificates
hmm
and I start the Web IDE, it will ask you if you want to create a certificate. So I wanted to have like to have
mm,
a better developer experience in there. And if I say yes, it will look for the tool and it will automatically create the certificates.
mm. And so if you refresh, is it still it still works?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That seems helpful. I've always just created my own certs. And so I'm trying to think, is there any downside to like the tool trying to create its own? I can't think of any downside.
To a tool thing trying to create their own
I just mean
certificates.
I always just manually like for the GDK and for um because we also currently have a way of like hosting the example app using
You
HTTPS
mean
with
with Let's Encrypt?
no, just using make cert. Just have a certs directory and I just create all whatever certs I'm needing to host whatever I'm doing. I'm not used to the tool asking me, "Hey, do you want me to create the certs for you?" And it sounds really convenient. I just trying to think, okay, is there any reason we wouldn't want it to like accept a path to cert, you know?
Yeah.
I can't think of a
Mm,
reason. It seems super helpful. I would just keep it the way it is, right?
yeah, I was thinking the same because we are not like this is still a manual operation in the GDK. So I was thinking like, is there a reason like that the GDK didn't automate that operation? That
I
it is
I
a
guess
manual
I
process?
I guess it depends. Like you're coupled now to make cert. Like you need to have make certs set up and working. Other people could prefer other kind of cert ways. Make cert is just so convenient that um but if the tool does see that those certs are there, it will not try to create it, right?
Yes, it will like it will just start the server from scratch and it won't try to create the to recreate the certificates again.
Okay.
Um,
Do we want, I'm just brainstorming now. Do you mind if I'm just throwing things out there?
yes, throw them
Um,
all.
okay. Um, do we, would we want to run all of this without HTTPS? Like, would we want to run it all with just HTTP for any reason?
Let's see. My my reasoning to use HTTPS by default is that I want to promote the idea or encourage the idea that where we run the Web IDE, it should resemble the production environment as much as
Yeah.
possible. Another advantage of using HTTPS locally is that we can run the extension host locally.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it would expect it couldn't run the crypto API.
Yeah. Uh, yes. Unfortunately, something Cindy and I just ran into our QA end-to-end tests all run eight on HTTP. Uh,
Ooh,
which is, I know. Um, so I can see like it being the only thing I can think of is like this makes could make it more difficult to debug HTTP specific issues. But it's like we shouldn't even be supporting non-HTTPS behavior, right?
And we
It's
What
not
just
do you think,
discussed
Chad?
it's not the
the
production
need to improve.
environment. Sorry, chat. Could you say again?
I was going to say we just discussed the need to improve the workspace's QA tests and those as well. There's like things that depend on HTTPS for example, the proxy, and how it handles those connections and the certs and all of that and the configuration of it.
Yeah. I'm gonna respond to that thread with Jay, and maybe I'll even try to hop on a pairing session with him. But it's like, can we set up one of those to run HTTPS? Either the like, I don't know what CNG stands for, but either that or the GDK one. But it's so straightforward to use make cert to just do that. I think it's good. I think it's really nice that it's all out of the box. I don't have to think about it and worry about it, and it just prompts me for like, hey, do you want me to generate the certs? And if I wanted to though provide it my own way, all I have to do is just make sure those files are present, and then it'll, then we're good. I think I think that's good. And if we run into any issues, we'll iterate. But I like that a lot. That seems really handy.
I'm not sure if the files can be named anyway, and it can they can if they can have any name. That's something that we could make configurable as well.
Hmm.
Because right now, the name resembles the wildcard domain that we are using to access the Web IDE. But perhaps that's something that is encrypted inside the certificate.
Have you if you change
I
to
don't I don't think you're talking about the actual name of the file, the cert
Yes.
file. No, I don't think it matters. Like
yeah, you can name it anything.
what's encrypted is the domains that it serves and any alt domains and the actual token and some other stuff.
If you go
Okay.
to the Web ID project in your local VS Code,
Yes.
I know that because I named them all sorts of random things when I'm like setting up my dog fooding workspaces servers. So it absolutely does not matter.
yeah, and if you jump down to the package JSON, there's a script for starting if you serve example, or if you keep going down, oh, you already changed all these stuff. There was one for starting it with HTTPS that existed before. I don't know if you came across that, but it
Yes, I actually like as I was explaining before, I want to have HTTPS by default rather than
yeah.
being optional. So something that I could do is that I is create one that is like example non-HTTPS.
That
Uh,
makes yeah. If we need to do that, or in yeah, like the no, what I was gonna oh yeah. So I see here you're doing SSL and then the certs. I see. Yeah. So in my previous script, I didn't pass the names themselves, and so the default names it looks for is just cert pim and keep pim or whatever, and it doesn't matter what the names are. Uh, but yeah, I think it's really cool. And I think it's we need to if we weren't doing HTTPS, I'd be concerned about using NIP IO because with HTTPS, we are more guaranteed that like technically this is still hitting I guess through DNS it's resolving something else, but it's like these are still a separate server, that
yeah.
some of that request is getting passed through. And if NIP IO got compromised, uh we wouldn't want it to be returning something malicious. But that's such a crazy edge case. I'm not.
Um, yes.
It's just DNS resolution, though. How could it be an attack vector?
That's what I'm trying to think now. How it could be used for as an attack vector. Well, like
If
it could say like for sure like it cannot send your information. I know that there is like an encrypted version of DNS that protects. I don't remember exactly what it protects, but it couldn't send. Maybe it could share your IP but it's a local IP as well. So I'm unsure like how the attack would unfold, and if HTTPS actually can protect us even. Um,
So it would mean that somehow the DNS doesn't resolve to your local server, right? So somehow if NipIO got compromised, the DNS would resolve to something malicious.
Yeah.
yes.
And but I was thinking the certs give us hopefully a level of protection there, but maybe not. I have no idea. Um,
But I would have to think that if that did happen, the the
it's
INAC or whatever they're called would like just yank that top level domain.
mhm.
Or as long as that's still a functioning federal agency. I don't know if it's a federal agency or if it's a private agency.
The IAC.
Yeah. I guess
Oh,
it's international.
I don't know. Uh,
Yeah, but I don't think that's something to worry about. Everybody uses the snip.io in a lot of places.
we'll just pick up the Anonophone and call Anonymous and say we need some help.
Some
So something
Dox him. Is
else
that
that
what you said, Chad? No, I think it's cool. Yeah, that's the only thing too. Is like I wish there was a way to keep it all local. That we didn't have to use this like. So okay, all right. I'm gonna pause then. All right, what happens if you're offline? This won't work probably, would it?
let me try.
All right,
No, I'm kidding.
Enrique's gonna be
I'm
the
I
coming
only
mean,
back
person.
in a
but
few seconds.
stopping you in that thread, even the GDK itself, like if you have everything your GDK updated and you have like downloaded, lazily downloaded Gitly and Workhorse and like all of those things and make sure you have them, then you can work on a plane if you don't try to change anything. But
Yeah,
even outside of that, it's like working offline with the GDK is a pretty narrow case.
Even like right now we cannot use the Web IDE in offline mode because it relies on the CDN for the extensions host.
that's true.
And the thing is, you can always hack around it. Just throw the actual domains in your Etsy host pointing to localhost, and then it just works. You don't need DNS.
Yeah, probably this is like it works better offline than the current setup that we have in the Web
Mm.
IDE because everything is
I
served from
Yeah,
the local environment.
yeah. I've set up before, and it was gnarly. I set up and I documented it somewhere, and it didn't make it into the main branch. It's in a commit somewhere. I have no idea where it is. Um, I set up a local DNS wildcard thing, and because I was needing to test the extension host locally, and making changes onto that. So I know you can do it locally, but it was quite a setup. It's something like I'd like super recommend it. But it is like, yeah, we could always fall back to that and find a way to um maybe resurrect that setup if needed. I would be just cautious if we could make variable or how variable are these origins. Um so where is that configuration? That where all is the nipio referenced?
Yes, that's what I wanted to show you next. So I created a configuration
Mm.
file and I separated by environment because what I'm expecting is that this setup will only work locally, but it won't work when we deploy the example app in GitLab pages. So for GitLab pages, we would use the current setup where we have the same domain for the embedder and the workbench. Actually, but eventually, like once we start deploying the workbench in this CDN, we can just like rely on that in a production environment
Mm.
on GitLab pages. I still have my doubts. This is like the kind of things that is difficult to understand if this is what we need or not, or if it's the right level of configuration. So I'm hoping like to get some feedback on it. But so far this is what I have. So if you're running locally, um, we're gonna pass. Oh, it's not here. It's in the script. We're gonna pass an IDE host config variable set into development, and its byte is going to pick this configuration.
Mm.
Otherwise, by default, it's just like the example app is built pointing to these origins.
Mm. Yeah. Do we see a path of moving, more of that config that config splash screen down into here? I mean, this is a separate conversation, but
That's the reason that that I felt that this solution was incomplete because I'm
mm,
very like so focused and over optimizing for the problem that I'm solving that I
yeah,
was wondering like, oh, I should like should I like think more broadly and just like think about a general configuration file that where we can move the client ID of OAuth and the GitLab URL as well. We could move all of that,
yeah,
but it feels like so out of scope because then I have to
yeah.
start like playing with how this interacts with the example app UI that we already have. It's a
Mhm.
bit complex.
Yeah. Okay, but so if I'm needing to work offline, um, well, let's be real. Let's say some less traitorous web ID engineers needing to work offline. Um, the and they were not going to use NipIL. They would just need to change these URLs and and then set up their own servers, and that's all I need to do is just I need to set up my own local DNS to point to things. I could even change the UUID to just if I don't have a wildcard domain, I could just have it for my own testing purposes using
Fixed.
the same
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Okay. That's cool. And so I think as long as it's documented and then well it'll grow. But I think it's helpful to keep it encapsulated like this. That makes sense.
Yeah. This
Are
is
are
like
we
I also submitted this to the repository though. So it's usually like when a file is submitted to the repository, it doesn't serve for developer customizations. I was wondering like if this should
yeah.
be like actually ignored, but if it is ignored, then everybody has to create one from scratch. Oh, something that I could do is just that include that as part of the script. Like if it doesn't find one, then just
I think I like that of like let's do a host config example JSON is committed. And then if we don't see a host config JSON, we just copy the example into it and then we're good to go. But then the actual non-example one is the one that's ignored. I like that kind of config pattern. Do we want to put this in a config folder? I think that would be kind of nice.
yeah,
And maybe just start that, you know. And maybe it'd be really cool if maybe that's where the certs could live too, maybe. Uh I
yeah,
don't know. Just
yeah.
thinking out loud.
I think it's a good preference.
Sorry, I missed the part about the repository thing. What was why was it an issue for this config to be pushed to the repository?
Well, imagine that you want to customize it and you want to use a different origin, a different URL. Then when you make this change, you by mistake commit it and push it to the repository, but it was only meant for you.
Right. I see. I see what you mean. Okay, cool. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. I'm used to like it's I think it's just a developer convenience thing. Because like yeah, as a developer you could just not try not to commit the thing that you touched,
Yeah,
um
it
but
happens.
I like the config pattern of where we commit the example one, but we ignore the actual one. I think that gets kind of cool. No, great work. I think it looks awesome. Are we concerned at all about like does this I don't know. Are we concerned about the continuing spread between the example app and what things look like on .com like currently like now that we have all I guess this is more like what the .com would be except the workbench is hosted separately now. I don't know, just thinking since we're updating the example app and .com isn't quite using all the cross origin stuff. Um
No,
Yet are we concerned about our example app uses cross origin but .com isn't? Is that gonna
the idea is that .com will use cross origin
yeah,
eventually. Just
yeah,
like we are not there yet, but
yeah,
that's the ultimate goal.
yeah. I mean, that's what I heard about the language server. That's an any day kind of thing.
Um, that's just laughing and crying at the same time.
Hiding the pain.
Yes. Um, no, but in this case, it's like the whole purpose of this project is to actually like deploy it on .com. Um, this is actually the last step after
Mm.
we have a test environment where we can test across origin mode. We can actually focus on making the changes on the Rails
Mm.
application and also deploying these files in the on the CDN. Um,
Cool.
yeah, I'm very excited about just like going to the next phase.
Yeah. I know we're at time. Do you have like one more minute?
Yeah, even more than that. Let
Um,
me just stop sharing my screen now that
oh,
the demo is.
well,
Oh,
I want to keep looking at your screen.
oh, thank you.
Uh, yeah, it's a good screen. You know, I like this IDE that you're using. Um, yeah, I like the little guy with goggles at the top of it too. He looks cute. Uh, um, the current origin, have you solved like how you want to replace that already, or is that are you thinking about how we want to implement that bit?
I just used the previous magic that was happening
Was there
in previous
previous magic
tests.
happening?
So it was just like using window location.
Oh, nice.
Uh, so I just like
Oh,
took
that's
the
great magic.
configuration file, well, the configuration string, the literal, and I replacing the placeholder with
Hmm.
the actual
Hmm.
origin.
I see. I see. Uh, was that what we were doing previously to get this working on pages?
Yeah.
Because I thought that it needed to include more than the origin because pages are also like in a subdomain or not subdomain, but like they're in like a relative URL. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, it was using actually href. So probably like that's
Ah,
the part that I'm
yes.
missing.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, well, that's a good observation.
Think
Let me
about
just
the what we would like to have happen when we are using this. Um, the we'd like to. You can. Let me rephrase it. Let me think about it. We should be able to run the example app from a merge request pipeline. So you should be able to just open up the index HTML of the create development package that builds the example app, and that actually that is one of the, I think, developer use cases that'd be really nice to preserve. But that means like it's all part of this like real. There's like inside the origin, there's also the pipeline job path, to those assets. So it's more than just the pages deployment. It's also um, running it inside a pipeline, which is cool.
Cool. Yeah, that's a very good observation. I thought that the href was. I didn't think that using href was intentionally accounting for the path name of the
Mm,
URL. But now that I know that it is intentional, I'm gonna preserve it.
okay. Yeah, I'm curious to that if that works. Well, cool. Yeah. No, that's really exciting. Yeah, I don't have anything else. Thanks for sharing this.
Thank you, Paul. By the way, another good benefit of this change is that if we want to test a new VS Code fork update, we don't have to deploy to the CDN. We just have like to actually like include the new build in the Web
Nice.
IDE,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
is
yeah.
in there. We
That's
can even
nice.
like test big changes to the VS Code fork.
So do we have an
Mhm.
issue for moving that CDN deployment to the Web ID? Is that a
I haven't created the epic yet, but
okay?
that's the next step.
I think the hardest thing is like, okay, yeah, I'd be really curious about that. Yeah, but that'll be exciting.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
I had one more thing on the list.
Oh yeah, on the agenda.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't even open. I didn't even add an item to the agenda chat. So probably that wasn't. You were the first one to actually like to start the meeting.
I wrote for you, Enrique.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Um, so yeah, I was just giving you a heads up. The investigation you did on the revamping the architecture of how it runs in workspaces. And my question is that impacted by any of the stuff you just talked about from the domains or the cross origin perspective, or is that all behind the scenes and doesn't impact this proposal?
No, it doesn't impact it. We are gonna continue deploying the VS Code fork files that workspaces rely on for the extensions host and the web view host as usual. If we thinking long term, um, but this is something that I don't want to say like, oh, like this is opening immediately an opportunity. It's more that it will have the potential of making development for the VS Code server in workspaces easier because in the architecture, let me share my screen. I open the issue. So we have these two components, VS Code Workbench and Workspaces frontend. And one of the points that I raised in this issue is that we don't have the possibility of displaying a loading screen when a workspace is starting. And if we want to customize the VS Code Workbench for workspaces, we have to now submit a change to the VS Code fork. And the reason for that is that the workbench is being served directly from the workspace's proxy. Well, it's not directly from there, but it goes through there and it's served directly from the VS Code server. Now that we are thinking about deploying a custom workbench as a separate application for the Web IDE. This is something that we could also use for workspaces. Imagine that.
Which is a
Let me
usability thing. We want to show like the loading progress or if it failed or whatever, like all the competitors do. Shea does it, CodeSpaces does it.
Yes, let me open the VS Code fork for a moment. Let me save this first.
This is starting to sound a lot like the original Web IDE. package that had start remote and start client only.
It's very similar, very, very similar. It's but with some differences. Um, so we have the workbench.html file, and this is what Workspaces is using now. At some point in this configuration in this file, we can actually pass a remote authority URL that is pointing to the VS Code server um, that the workspace is hosting. Is that the right way of saying it? Well, the VS Code server that is running in the workspace. That's the right way of saying it.
Yes.
So,
It's injected into the workspace and is running and serving and exposed to the proxy.
yes. So if we pass a remote authority, like if we take this HTML and we develop it just as a separate application, in the same way that we are implementing the Web IDE workbench, and we are just passing as a parameter to that application, to that, let's say like VS Code Web, the VS Code server running the workspace, then we will have a lot of flexibility to customize VS Code for workspaces as well.
Yeah. So the output though is what you're the output of that separate quote unquote application would be this HTML file.
Yes. Just in the same
So
way
we
that we are doing with the
yeah.
Web IDE.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we would still use the VS Code server as is out of the box, but maybe find a way to um inject our own workbench HTML into it. And I think it makes sense being in a separate project in the VS Code fork. I don't know if we'd want to do it in the GitLab Web IDE project or in a separate project.
That's that's complex. Like I wouldn't dare uh to suggest like how we do it right now because we have to handle the differences between the two projects. Um,
They have such different like releases too, you know. Um I don't know if we'd want them to be in the same thing, but
yeah.
maybe.
Also, like the Web ID is bundling extensions in a different way. We need to bundle extensions in workspaces by installing them in the actual container. So it's complex, but at least like we have the awareness that in order to achieve some of the features that our competitors are including, like a loading screen, a better way of restoring a workspace from being suspended, we need to follow that kind of architecture.
Is the tool injector, is that maybe a good like do we still have that as a project?
Great. Well, yeah, that's what injects the VS Code fork. But I guess I think I understood this and then I forgot it, Enrique. Like, what is actually serving the workbench page in this new approach?
It could be CDN, it could be the GitLab Rails application. It's a separate HTTP
So it's
server.
effectively like a single page app, but for any dynamic parts of it, it will have to be talking to the API, like, updating the status. So my question is like, how does those get authenticated if it's just served out of a CDN?
No, it cannot be served. I think that for workspaces, it couldn't be served from the CDN. What I was thinking is that let me go back to the issue. That in this diagram, what I see is that the JavaScript assets are served from the CDN, and then the workspaces proxy, which is an HTTP server as well, right?
Yes.
That will have to handle or become a middleman between the VS Code server, the CDN, and all the authentication with the and access to the GitLab API.
So
Right. And
I,
the other wrinkle in this is we are going to move forward with trying to implement workspaces on runners along the lines that Dylan has proposed in his spike. So that's going to completely change like the concept of the workspace proxy. It's not going to be this thing that runs in Kubernetes. It's going to be something that happens in the monolith around runners.
I think that's good because that means that
Yeah,
we can actually like serve these assets from the monolith, and that's
constantly.
gonna make
Yes.
it way easier.
Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you a couple of times already, Paul.
No, you're good. Yeah, I'd be worried for workspaces to be coupled to the Web IDE CDN stuff. I'd rather see this stuff somehow live within the tool that we're injecting.
Yeah,
Like
we
all
wouldn't want to do that anyway for like air and on-prem.
right, right.
Like we already have
Um,
complaining we don't support private registries and private Git repos and all of that.
yeah. Going back to the code though, that workbench HTML. Can you open that up again,
Yes,
Enrique?
of course.
Um, so I think that the server is actually like overwriting some variables here. Like there's right because I see like workbench web base URL. I don't think that's a build time replacement.
No,
I think the
it's
server overwrites this, right?
yes. This is the client HTTP server implementation that the VS Code server uses,
Right, 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 right.
and the the workbench configuration and the product configuration. All of this is built and injected here.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. So I think when we replace if we're talking about customizing this workbench HTML, I think I think the easiest path forward is keeping it co-located with the server so the server can overwrite it with the variables it needs to and we handle that however it needs to. But we can customize our own
When do you
scripts or
mean
list
co-located with the server?
because like if you go look at the workbench
You mean
HTML,
the VS Code server?
right? Because that's what
Yeah, but that's
replaces.
problematic. Like part of the whole point of this in the workspaces scenario is the server's not running yet, and we need to tell them that until the server.
Exactly. Exactly. Like probably like this shouldn't be
Oh,
collocated
I
with
see what you're
the
saying.
yeah. It's
Oh, I see.
you
Okay.
can imagine this as a Rails controller where we are
Mm,
basically
okay.
passing the remote authority. Let me see where it is. So
Okay,
this
I think I
remote
see what you're saying.
authority it will point to the workspace, and then everything
Mhm.
else is just a Rails controller that is building this configuration.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe that's what you were talking about then for this proxies. It makes sense for us to maybe then not touch this, but to have something that composes that server that's sitting outside of it and is able to listen on the inside of like, are we ready? We're not ready. We're going to show the status page. Kind of like
Yeah,
how for the GDK, there's that workhorse kind of acts as that proxy where when the GDK is running, it's like, hey, we're not ready yet. This is our status.
and
That
the
makes sense.
behavior in code spaces, at least, and I think Shay too. Like you could just completely stop the workspace, and VS Code goes into this mode like, "Hey, I've gone away," but the page
Mm,
is still
yeah,
there,
yeah,
right?
yeah. No, the proxy pattern makes a lot of sense in that regard. That makes sense. I've got to hop off. No, thanks for the chat. You guys keep going. I've got to go. So see you.
All right, Paul.
So that was it. Just giving you a heads up that we're maybe not on the immediate horizon, but we definitely want to do this eventually. And as long as it's not impacted by any of the importance or host and CDN changes you have in mind, it's fine.
Thank you, chat. Yeah, and if I can participate or chime in any of these discussions, because I don't know if you are actually planning
We've got
to
so
design an
many
architecture that
things.
allows like to huh?
So it's probably not going to be anytime soon. We have so much on our plate,
I can
but
imagine. I can imagine. Well, if there is like if it comes up at some point, the idea of like building this dynamic workbench where we can show the loading screen, just let me know and I can provide my input.
Yeah, it's like all tied together with this theme of like our feedback for what's going on in the workspace, good or bad or anything, is virtually non-existent. It just sucks. So this could be a big part of that.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining the call. I'm gonna be uploading it later. And have a good rest of your day. Good luck with all of those meetings in the in
All
the
right,
future chat, teacher. Bye
bye.
bye.
Thanks for the demo, Enrique.
Thank
See
you for
ya.
coming. Bye bye.